The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in front of the trading post, and Victoria Valentine pressed her gloved hand against the window, her heart hammering as she took in the wilderness that would be her new home. Shoshone City, Idaho Territory, was nothing like the letters had described, nothing like the promises written in careful script by the man who was supposed to meet her here. The few weathered buildings scattered along the dirt road looked more like a desperate outpost than a town, dwarfed by the towering mountains that rose like sentinels in every direction. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, feeling the weight of the lies she had told pressing down on her chest. The driver opened the door and helped her down, his weathered face showing surprise at her appearance. Victoria knew what he saw. A woman of 23 with skin the color of rich coffee, her mother's Cherokee and African blood mixing with her father's Scottish heritage to create features that turned heads wherever she went. Her dark eyes were too large, her mouth too full, her hair too thick and curly beneath her modest bonnet. The photograph she had sent to Mr. Edmund Pritchard had been of her cousin Sarah, pale and blonde and acceptable. The real Victoria Valentine was none of those things. "This all your luggage, miss?" the driver asked, setting down her single trunk. "Yes, that's everything." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Everything she owned in the world fit in one trunk and one bag, everything except the truth. The trading post door swung open, and a round man with spectacles emerged, wiping his hands on his apron. "You must be Miss Valentine, here for Edmund Pritchard." Victoria nodded, unable to force words past the tightness in her throat. The man's expression turned somber. "I'm afraid I have terrible news, miss. Edmund took sick with pneumonia 3 weeks back, passed away 5 days ago. We sent a telegram to Boston, but I suppose it didn't reach you in time." The ground seemed to tilt beneath Victoria's feet. Dead. The man she had traveled 2,000 miles to marry was dead. She should feel grief, but all she felt was a strange numbness mixed with rising panic. "I see," she managed. "Thank you for telling me. There's a boarding house in town, run by Mrs. Chen. She might have a room, though I cannot speak to the cost." The man looked uncomfortable, as if he wanted to help but did not know how. Victoria calculated quickly. She had $4.37 to her name. That would not last long anywhere, let alone in a frontier town where a woman alone was viewed with suspicion. "Is there work here? I can cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts." "Well now, I suppose Mrs. Chen might need help. And there's always the saloon, but that's no place for a lady." He paused, his eyes sliding over her features with dawning understanding. "Might be harder for you than most, if you take my meaning. Some folk out here got particular ideas." I understand. She had lived with those particular ideas her whole life. In Boston, her light skin and education had allowed her to pass in some circles, while in others she was too dark, too different, too much of a reminder of things polite society preferred to ignore. Here in the wilderness, she would be even more visible, more vulnerable. The trading post owner helped carry her trunk to the boarding house, a squat building with a painted sign that read Chen's Lodging and Meals. A small Chinese woman with gray-streaked hair answered the door, her sharp eyes taking in Victoria's appearance in one swift glance. "How long you need room?" Mrs. Chen asked without preamble. "I'm not certain. I came to marry Edmund Pritchard, but I've just learned he passed away. I need work and lodging until I can figure out my next step." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. 30 cents a night includes breakfast. "I need help with laundry and cleaning. I can give you credit against your room if you work." It was more than Victoria had hoped for. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I accept." The room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was clean and the window overlooked the mountains. Victoria unpacked her few belongings and changed from her traveling dress into a simpler work dress, then reported to the kitchen where Mrs. Chen had a mountain of laundry waiting. As she scrubbed sheets in the large washtub, Victoria let herself acknowledge the full weight of her situation. She had lied to Edmund Pritchard, sending Sarah's photograph because she knew no man would accept a mail-order bride who looked like her. Sarah had thought it a grand adventure, helping Victoria craft letters that painted her as a demure blonde with household skills and modest expectations. Edmund had written back eagerly, describing his successful freight business and his comfortable home on the edge of Shoshone City. He had seemed kind in his letters, educated and thoughtful. Now he was dead, and Victoria was stranded 2,000 miles from home with no prospects and no way back. She could not return to Boston. The family she had worked for as a governess had dismissed her when their eldest son had developed inappropriate feelings for her, as if his inability to control himself was somehow her fault. Sarah had already done too much by taking her in and helping her answer the mail-order bride advertisement. Victoria was on her own. She spent 3 days working for Mrs. Chen, learning the rhythms of the boarding house and the small community that gathered there for meals. Shoshone City existed primarily to service the trappers, miners, and traders who worked in the surrounding mountains. It was 1874, and Idaho territory was still wild and untamed, a place where fortunes could be made or lost in a season, where winter could kill the unprepared and isolation could drive a person mad. On the 4th day, a man walked into the trading post while Victoria was there buying flour for Mrs. Chen. He had to duck to enter through the doorway, standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed to fill the small space. His dark brown hair hung past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was hidden behind a thick beard that could not quite conceal a jagged scar running from his left temple to his jaw. He wore buckskin clothing that had seen hard use, and his blue-gray eyes swept the room with the wariness of a wild animal entering civilization. "Jackson," the trading post owner greeted him with genuine warmth. "Good to see you down from your mountain. Got your supplies ready?" "Appreciate it, Hank." The man's voice was deep and rough, as if he did not use it often. His gaze landed on Victoria and held for a moment, his eyes widening slightly before he looked away. "This here is Miss Victoria Valentine," Hank said. "She came to marry Edmund Pritchard, poor soul. Arrived just after he passed. Victoria, this is Jackson Lockwood, has a cabin up in the high country. Best trapper in these parts." Jackson nodded to her politely but did not speak, turning his attention to the supplies Hank was loading onto the counter. Victoria noticed his hands, large and scarred but moving with surprising gentleness as he examined a new hunting knife. "Will you be staying in town tonight, Jackson?" Hank asked. "Mrs. Chen has rooms available. No, want to get back before dark." Jackson counted out payment for his supplies in a mix of coins and folded bills. "You know winter is coming hard this year. Old Pete says it will be the worst in 20 years. You have enough laid by. Always do." Jackson hefted a bag of flour over one shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "I'll be back in spring." Victoria watched him load his pack mule outside, moving with efficient economy. There was something fascinating about him, this man who chose to live alone in the mountains through winters that could kill. What drove someone to such isolation? She did not expect to see him again. But that evening Jackson Lockwood appeared at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, his hat in his hands and his expression uncomfortable. "Can I speak with Miss Valentine?" he asked Mrs. Chen, who looked as surprised as Victoria felt. They sat in the small parlor, an awkward silence stretching between them. Jackson stared at his hands, his jaw working as if he was trying to force words out. "I knew Edmund Pritchard," he finally said. "He was a decent man. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Lockwood." "That's kind of you to say. Jackson. Just Jackson." He took a breath. "I heard you came all this way thinking you would marry him, that you are stuck here now with no way forward." Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My situation is not your concern, Mr. Lockwood." "Jackson," he corrected again. "And maybe it should not be my concern, but I find that it is." He finally looked up at her, those blue-gray eyes intense and sincere. "I live alone up on the mountain. Have for 8 years now. It's a hard life, but it's honest, and I do well enough with my trapping. I'm not much for company, and I probably have forgotten half of how to talk to people proper. But I have a solid cabin and enough supplies to see 2 people through the winter comfortably." Victoria's heart began to pound as she realized what he was suggesting. "I am not a man who knows how to say pretty things," Jackson continued, his words coming faster now as if he needed to get them all out before he lost courage. "But I am honest and I work hard, and I would treat you with respect. If you need a husband, Miss Valentine, I am offering to be that. If you are willing." "You don't even know me," Victoria whispered. "You've seen me for all of 5 minutes. I know you are in trouble and need help. I know you came all this way to start a new life, and that should not be stolen from you because Edmund Pritchard got sick." He paused, his fingers clenching on the brim of his hat. "And I know I am lonely up on that mountain, even if I have been too stubborn to admit it before now." "Why me? You could place an advertisement, find someone more suitable." She needed to know if he understood what he was asking, if he saw what she was. Jackson met her eyes steadily. "You mean because you are not white? I noticed, Miss Valentine. I also noticed that you carry yourself with dignity despite your circumstances, that you are working hard to make your own way, and that you have kind eyes. The color of your skin matters about as much to me as the color of yours hat. Which is to say, not at all." Victoria felt something crack open in her chest, a painful hope she had been afraid to allow herself. "I lied to Edmund Pritchard," she said, needing him to know the worst before he made any decisions. "I sent him a photograph of my cousin, a white woman, because I knew he would never accept me otherwise. I deceived him." "Did you lie about anything else? Your character, your skills, your intentions?" "No, everything else was true." Jackson nodded slowly. "Then you did what you had to do to survive in a world that judges people by foolish measures. I cannot fault you for that. You would marry a woman who is capable of such deception. I would marry a woman who is brave enough to travel 2,000 miles alone for a chance at a better life. I would marry a woman who faces disaster with her chin up and her hands working. The rest is just details, Miss Valentine." Victoria's hands were shaking. "I need time to think about this. It's a huge decision." "Of course, but I need an answer by morning. Winter is coming, and if we are going to do this, we need to get up the mountain before the first big snow hits." That night, Victoria lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Jackson Lockwood was offering her exactly what she had come west to find: a husband, a home, and a fresh start. But he was also a stranger, a man who lived in isolation in the wilderness. She would be completely dependent on him, miles from any help if things went wrong. What did she really know about his character? He could be cruel, violent, or worse, but what were her alternatives? She could stay in Shoshone City and try to make a living with the handful of jobs available to a woman alone. She could save up money for passage back to Boston, where she had no home and no prospects. Or she could take a chance on this scarred mountain man who looked at her with honest eyes and offered her the thing she wanted most: a place where she belonged. Victoria thought about the way Jackson had stood in the trading post. his size and strength obvious but held in careful check. She thought about how he had struggled to find the words to make his offer, his discomfort with speaking showing how much courage it had taken him to come to the boarding house. She thought about what he had said about her skin mattering as much as the color of her hat. By morning, she had made her decision. Jackson was waiting in Mrs. Chen's dining room, his pack already loaded and his mule ready outside. He stood when Victoria entered, his whole body tense. "I'll marry you," Victoria said without preamble, "but I have conditions." Something that might have been relief flickered across his face. "Name them." "I want your word that you will never strike me, no matter how angry you might get. I want your promise that if things do not work out between us, you will not trap me on that mountain. You will let me leave if I choose to go." "You have my word on both counts," Jackson said solemnly. "Anything else? I want you to be patient with me. I have never been a wife before and I will make mistakes. I want honesty between us, even when the truth is hard." "I can do that." "Do you have conditions for yourself?" The question surprised her. "What do you mean? You are asking things of me. It is only fair I know what you are offering in return." Victoria considered. "I will work hard to make your cabin into a proper home. I will be faithful to you and treat you with respect. I will try my best to be a good wife, though I am certain my best will look different than what you might have imagined." Jackson nodded. "That's more than fair. Shall we find someone to marry us?" They were wed an hour later by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through Shoshone City on his way to the mining camps. Mrs. Chen and Hank from the trading post stood as witnesses. Victoria wore her best dress, dark blue wool with black trim, and Jackson had shaved his beard down and put on a clean shirt. They stood before the preacher in Mrs. Chen's parlor and spoke vows that bound them together in the eyes of God and the law. When the preacher told Jackson he could kiss his bride, the mountain man looked panicked for a moment before leaning down and pressing the briefest, most chaste kiss imaginable to Victoria's lips. His face was bright red as he pulled back. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I should have asked permission first." Despite everything, Victoria felt laughter bubble up. "We are married now, Jackson. I think you are allowed to kiss me. Still, I should have asked." He looked so uncomfortable that Victoria took pity on him. "Let us get on the road. You said we need to reach your cabin before the snow." They loaded Victoria's trunk onto the mule alongside Jackson's supplies. She had said goodbye to Mrs. Chen that morning, thanking her for the kindness she had shown. The older woman had pressed a small package of tea into Victoria's hands. "For the winter," Mrs. Chen had said. "Marriage is hard. Tea helps." Now Victoria walked beside Jackson as he led the mule up a narrow trail that wound into the mountains. The late October air was crisp and cold, smelling of pine and approaching winter. They walked in silence for the first hour, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on the rocky trail and the occasional snort from the mule. "How far is your cabin?" Victoria finally asked. "About 6 hours at this pace. We will get there before sunset if we keep moving steady." "Do you make this trip often?" "Once a month in summer and fall. In winter, I only come down if I run short of something critical or there is a chance to trade furs. It is not a trip to make lightly when the snow is deep." Victoria absorbed this, understanding more fully what she had agreed to. 6 hours from the nearest other people, cut off completely for months at a time in winter. "Do you ever get lonely?" Jackson walked several paces before answering. "Yes, but lonely up there felt safer than being around people. At least it did until recently." "What changed recently?" He glanced at her, then away. "I will answer that, but first I need to tell you something, about why I live up here alone, about why I look the way I do." Victoria waited, sensing this was important. 8 years ago, I was engaged to be married. Her name was Margaret, and she was beautiful and sophisticated, and I thought I was the luckiest man alive. We were going to have a big wedding in Denver, where her family lived. But 2 weeks before the ceremony, there was a fire at her father's house. I was staying there, and I woke to flames everywhere. I went through the house getting everyone out, and I was the last one to leave. A burning beam fell on me as I was trying to get through a doorway. He touched the scar on his face unconsciously. I nearly died from the burns and the smoke. Took months to recover. That must have been terrible, Victoria said softly. The physical recovery was not the hard part. The hard part was when Margaret came to see me in the hospital. She could not even look at me. She said she was sorry, but she could not possibly marry me looking the way I did. She gave me back the ring, and that was that. His voice was matter of fact, but Victoria could hear the old pain underneath. Her father offered me money as compensation, which made me feel about as low as a man can feel. I took enough to buy supplies and disappeared into these mountains. Been here ever since. She was a fool, Victoria said fiercely. You saved her life and her family's lives, and she threw you away because of a scar. Jackson looked surprised at her vehemence. Most women want a husband who is pleasant to look at. Cannot blame her for that. I absolutely can blame her for that. You are a hero, Jackson Lockwood. What you have on your face is a mark of courage and selflessness. Any woman who cannot see that is not worth your time. Victoria was angry on his behalf, angry at the stupid woman who had hurt him so deeply that he had hidden himself away for 8 years. They walked in silence for a while, climbing higher into the mountains. The trail grew steeper and Victoria's legs began to ache, but she pushed forward without complaining. You asked what changed recently, Jackson said eventually. You changed things, Miss Victoria. Mrs. Victoria, I suppose I should say now. When I saw you in the trading post, looking so lost and trying so hard to be brave, something just broke open in me, made me realize I had been hiding long enough, made me want to be part of the world again. He paused. Also, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, which probably makes me 7 kinds of fool for saying so, but there it is. Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest. I do not think you are a fool. I think you are a kind man who has been hurt, and I am grateful you took a chance on me. I think we are taking a chance on each other, Jackson said. Seems only fair. They stopped briefly at midday to eat jerky and hardtack beside a stream. Victoria's feet were blistering in her good boots, which had not been made for mountain hiking, but she said nothing. Jackson noticed anyway. Your feet hurting, a bit. I should have thought of that. Your town boots are not made for this trail. He dug through his pack and pulled out a small tin. This is bear grease mixed with herbs. If you rub it on your feet at night, it will help with the blisters. I am sorry. I did not think about proper footwear for you. How could you have? We barely knew we were getting married until this morning. Victoria took the tin gratefully. I'll manage. You are managing real well for someone who is not used to mountain travel. Most folks from back east are huffing and complaining by now. My mother's people were Cherokee. She used to say I had strong legs from her side of the family. Of course, she said that while we were walking to the market because we could not afford the trolley, so it might have been wishful thinking more than fact. Jackson smiled, the expression transforming his face. I think she was right. You are keeping pace better than men I have known who claim to be experienced outdoorsmen. They reached the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Jackson's home was larger than Victoria had expected, built solidly of logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. It sat in a small clearing beside a stream with a lean-to for the mule and a shed for storing supplies. It is not fancy, Jackson said, suddenly sounding nervous. but it is tight and warm." He opened the door and let her enter first. The interior was one large room with a stone fireplace on one wall, a bed in one corner, a table and chairs near the fireplace, and a cooking area with a good iron stove. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment. Everything was neat and organized, cleaner than Victoria had expected for a bachelor's cabin. "There is a root cellar below the floorboards," Jackson said, pointing to a trapdoor. "Stays cool year-round for storing meat and vegetables. And there is a spring house down by the stream for keeping milk and butter cold. You have a cow, 2 cows actually, and chickens, though they are shut up in the shed for now. Did not want them to get eaten while I was gone." He began unloading their supplies from the mule. "I know you are probably used to better accommodations." Victoria turned in a slow circle, taking in the sturdy cabin with its solid walls and well-stocked shelves. "Jackson, I shared a room with 3 other governesses in Boston. Before that, I grew up in a 2-room apartment with my mother and younger brother. This cabin is the nicest place I have ever lived." He looked relieved. "Truly, truly, it is wonderful." She went to the windows and looked out at the view of mountains and forests stretching in every direction. "And this view is worth more than all the fancy houses in Boston." Jackson lit a fire in the fireplace and the stove, and soon the cabin was warming up. He brought in water from the stream and set a kettle to boil. Victoria found herself standing awkwardly in the middle of the room, suddenly aware that she was alone with this man, her husband, miles from anyone else. "I imagine you are tired," Jackson said, seeming to sense her nervousness. "It has been a long day. I can make us some supper if you want to rest." "I am tired, but I am also hungry. Let me help with the cooking. You must be just as exhausted as I am." They worked together to prepare a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. The domesticity of it was strange and comforting at the same time. Jackson moved around the small kitchen area with easy competence, and Victoria found herself relaxing slightly. As they ate at the small table, Victoria studied her new husband in the firelight. His face was still hard to read behind his beard, but his eyes were gentle and he took care not to crowd her space. "I suppose we should talk about sleeping arrangements," Jackson said, his ears turning red. "I can make up a bedroll by the fire. You take the bed. We are married, Jackson. It does not seem right for you to sleep on the floor in your own home. I do not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. We barely know each other." Victoria appreciated his consideration, but she also understood the practicalities of their situation. "What if we share the bed but keep our clothes on, at least for now, until we are more comfortable with each other?" Jackson nodded quickly. "That seems fair. Thank you for being understanding about this. I know most new husbands probably do not sleep in their breeches on their wedding night. I do not think most marriages start the way ours has. I think we can make our own rules." That night, Victoria changed into her nightgown and a warm robe while Jackson waited outside. When she called that she was ready, he came in and banked the fire, then lay down on top of the quilt on the far edge of the bed, still fully dressed. Victoria lay down on her side, her back to him, hyper-aware of his presence just inches away. "Good night, Victoria," Jackson said softly. "Good night, Jackson." She thought she would never be able to sleep, but exhaustion from the long day of travel pulled her under almost immediately. She woke once in the deep night to find the cabin cold and herself shivering. Before she was fully awake, Jackson was up and rebuilding the fire, moving quietly so as not to disturb her more than necessary. When he came back to bed, Victoria instinctively moved closer to his warmth. He stiffened for a moment, then carefully put an arm around her. "Is this all right?" he whispered. "Yes," she whispered back. "I am cold. He pulled her a bit closer, and Victoria could feel the heat radiating from his large body. She fell back asleep feeling safe and warm, which was more than she had expected on her first night as Mrs. Jackson Lockwood. The next days fell into a pattern as they learned to live together. Jackson woke before dawn each day to tend his animals and check his trap lines. Victoria took over the cooking and cleaning, finding satisfaction in making the cabin feel more like a home. She washed the curtains and discovered they had once been a cheerful yellow, though years of smoke and dust had dulled them to gray. She aired out the quilts and reorganized the shelves, making everything more efficient. Jackson was an easy man to live with. He was quiet but not sullen, helpful without being overbearing. He answered her questions about mountain life patiently and seemed genuinely interested when she talked about her life in Boston. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences, the small details that make cohabitation work. On the fourth day, Victoria woke to find snow falling softly outside the windows. She stood wrapped in a quilt and watched the flakes drift down, transforming the landscape into something magical. "First snow of the season," Jackson said, coming to stand beside her. "It will melt off in a day or two, but the big snows are not far behind. I am glad we made it up here when we did. It is beautiful. Have you seen much snow before? Some in Boston, but never anything like this, never in a place so wild." Jackson smiled. "Wait until the deep winter. We will get snows that pile up past the windows. It is like living in a cave made of white, peaceful and quiet, though it can feel like the whole world has disappeared. Does that frighten you, being so isolated? It used to be what I wanted. Now, with you here, I find I am looking forward to winter differently. It will be nice to have someone to talk to when we are snowed in." They spent the day doing indoor tasks. Victoria mended some of Jackson's clothes while he repaired a broken snowshoe and oiled his traps. In the evening, they played cards using a worn deck Jackson had owned for years. Victoria won 3 games of rummy in a row, and Jackson accused her of being a card sharp. "I merely pay attention," Victoria said with a laugh. "You give away your good hands by looking too pleased with yourself." "I do not," Jackson protested, but he was grinning. "You absolutely do. Your eyes get all crinkly at the corners when you think you are going to win." He touched his face self-consciously. "I did not know I did that." "It is endearing," Victoria said, then felt herself blush. "I mean, it is a very honest tell. For cards." They both looked away, awkward again. These moments kept happening, little flashes of connection followed by uncertainty. They were married but still strangers in so many ways. That night as they lay in bed, Jackson spoke into the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What made you answer a mail-order bride advertisement? A woman like you, educated and capable, you must have had other options." Victoria was silent for a long moment, deciding how much to share. "My father was a Scottish merchant who fell in love with my mother when she was working as a seamstress. Her mother was Cherokee, and her father was a freed slave. When my father's family found out he had married her, they disowned him completely. He tried to make a living in Boston, but it was hard. He died when I was 12, and my mother worked herself into an early grave trying to keep my brother and me fed and educated." She felt Jackson shift beside her, listening intently. "I got work as a governess when I was 18. The family I worked for was kind enough at first, but their oldest son developed feelings for me. When his mother caught him trying to kiss me, she dismissed me immediately. Said I must have encouraged him, that girls like me were always trying to trap wealthy men." The old bitterness crept into her voice. "She told everyone we knew that I was a seductress who could not be trusted around men. No one else would hire me after that." "That is not right," Jackson said fiercely. "You should not have been punished for some fool boy's behavior." "Right or not, It is what happened. My cousin Sarah took me in, but I could not stay there forever. When she suggested I could answer mail-order bride advertisements, it seemed like my only option. A chance to start over somewhere people did not already have their minds made up about who I was. I am sorry you went through that, but I am grateful it led you here. Victoria rolled over to face him, though she could barely see him in the darkness. You keep saying things like that, like you are glad I am here. But Jackson, you barely know me. I might be terrible. You are not terrible. You are brave and strong, and you make this cabin feel like more than just a place to survive the winter. You are making it a home. He paused. And I like talking to you. I like hearing you laugh. I like the way you get a little crinkle between your eyebrows when you are concentrating on something. I know we have not been married long, but I am already certain I am lucky to have you here. Victoria's throat felt tight. I am not brave. I am terrified most of the time. Terrified I will fail at being a wife. Terrified you will regret choosing me. Terrified I will not be able to survive up here. Being brave does not mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done even when you are scared. And you are doing that every day. He reached out carefully and took her hand. We are going to be fine, Victoria, both of us. She held onto his hand in the darkness, drawing comfort from his certainty. How can you be so sure? Because we are both trying. That is more than a lot of married folks can say. Over the next weeks, they settled deeper into their life together. The deep snows came as Jackson had predicted, piling up against the cabin walls and transforming the world into a white wonderland. Victoria learned to make bread that rose properly at the high altitude, to churn butter, to preserve meat and vegetables. Jackson taught her to recognize the signs of changing weather, to check the animals efficiently, to move through snow without exhausting herself. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories from their different lives. Jackson had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 6 children. He had come west seeking adventure and fortune, working as everything from a wagon train guard to a ranch hand before Margaret's rejection sent him into the mountains. Victoria told him about her mother's stories of Cherokee traditions, about her brother who had died of typhoid when he was 15, about the books she had read, and the dreams she had harbored of seeing more of the world. You still can see the world, Jackson said. Maybe not right now, but someday. I could take you to San Francisco, or we could go east to Denver or Salt Lake City. You would do that. Leave your mountain. For a visit, sure. This place is my home, but it does not have to be a prison. We could travel in the summer when the trapping is slow. The idea filled Victoria with unexpected joy. She had assumed marrying a mountain man meant consigning herself to isolation forever. Knowing Jackson was willing to take her to see new places made her feel less trapped. They grew more comfortable with each other physically as well. Jackson stopped sleeping fully dressed, stripping down to his undershirt and drawers. Victoria found she liked being held by him at night, the solid warmth of his body and the surprising gentleness of his touch. They began kissing, tentative at first and then with growing confidence. Jackson was always careful, always asking permission, and Victoria found herself wanting more from him even as she was nervous about what more would mean. One night in late November, as they lay wrapped around each other in the big bed, Victoria gathered her courage. Jackson, I think I am ready to be your wife in all ways. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face in the firelight. You are sure? There is no rush. I am content to wait as long as you need. I am sure. I want this. I want you. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Victoria felt heat pool in her belly. Jackson made love to her slowly and carefully, paying attention to her responses and making sure she felt pleasure as well as discomfort. Afterward, he held her close and stroked her hair. Are you all right? He asked softly. More than all right, that was wonderful. It will get even better as we learn what we each like. We have all winter to practice." Victoria laughed, feeling light and happy despite the soreness between her legs. "Is that a promise, Mr. Lockwood?" "Absolutely, Mrs. Lockwood." December brought heavier snows and temperatures so cold that ice formed on the inside of the windows. Victoria and Jackson stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only to tend the animals and get water from the stream. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud from Jackson's small collection of books, playing cards, and making love under heavy quilts. Victoria discovered she loved the intimacy of their isolated life. In Boston, she had always felt watched and judged. Here on the mountain, she could be fully herself. She could laugh too loud, speak her mind without worrying about propriety, and touch her husband whenever she wanted. Jackson seemed to bloom as well, becoming more talkative and affectionate as the weeks passed. On Christmas Day, Jackson surprised her with gifts he had been hiding. A new pair of boots made from soft deerskin that fit her perfectly, a warm cloak lined with rabbit fur, and a necklace of polished stones he had collected from the stream. "I am sorry they are not fancy," he said as she examined the necklace with delight, "but I wanted you to have something special. They are perfect. I love them." Victoria had made him new shirts from fabric she had found in his supplies, embroidering his initials on the cuffs. "I am sorry mine are not more exciting." "Are you joking? I have not had a new shirt in 3 years, and you did fancy stitching on them. That is the nicest thing anyone has given me in longer than I can remember." They made a special dinner of roasted chicken and dried apple pie, and Jackson produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving. They toasted to their strange marriage and surprising happiness, sitting close together at the small table while snow fell softly outside. "I did not order you," Jackson said, a bit drunk and very sincere. "But Victoria, you are so much better than anything I could have dreamed. I thank God every day that I walked into that trading post when I did." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "I thought I was going to hate it here. I thought I would be miserable and alone even though I was married. But Jackson, I have never been happier. You make me feel seen and valued and safe. You make me feel like I finally found where I belong." He kissed her, tasting of whiskey and promise. "You do belong here, with me. For as long as you want to stay." "Forever might not be long enough," Victoria whispered against his lips. January and February were brutal. The snow piled up past the windows as Jackson had predicted, and temperatures dropped so low that going outside felt like being stabbed with ice. They burned through wood at an alarming rate and had to ration their lamp oil carefully. Jackson went out daily to check on the animals, returning red-faced and ice-covered. Victoria worried about him constantly, terrified he would get caught in a whiteout or fall and freeze before he could get back to the cabin. But they were snug and well supplied, and the cabin held the warmth well. They passed the time telling stories, singing songs, and developing elaborate games to keep themselves entertained. Jackson taught Victoria to identify animal tracks from his collection of drawings. Victoria taught Jackson some of the Cherokee words her mother had known. In March, the weather finally began to break. The snow still fell but less frequently, and there were days when the sun came out and everything sparkled with blinding brightness. Jackson dug paths to the various outbuildings and began checking his trap lines again. Victoria took over the harder work of managing the animals, milking the cows and collecting eggs while Jackson was gone. One afternoon in early April, Jackson came back from checking his farthest trap line looking thoughtful. "The snow is melting fast on the lower trails," he said. "Another few weeks, and we will be able to get down to Shoshone City. I need to trade my winter pelts and get more supplies." Victoria felt a flutter of nervousness. She had been cocooned in their private world for so long that the idea of seeing other people felt strange and slightly frightening. "I was thinking," Jackson continued, sitting down at the table across from her. "Maybe we should think about building a bigger cabin, one with a separate bedroom and maybe a proper parlor. If we are going to raise children here, we will need more space." Victoria stared at him. "Children? We have talked about maybe having children someday, but Jackson, I am not even sure I can have children. And is this really the right place to raise a family? Why would it not be? I grew up in the country and it did me fine. Kids need fresh air and room to run more than they need fancy schools and city living." He reached for her hand. "But I am getting ahead of myself. I should have asked properly first. Victoria, do you want to have children? With me?" She thought about it seriously. A few months ago, the idea of bringing a baby into this isolated existence would have terrified her. But now, having survived the winter and found unexpected happiness, it seemed not just possible but desirable. "Yes," she said, "I would like that. I would like to have your children and raise them here. But Jackson, if I am carrying a baby, I want to be somewhere with a doctor or midwife when the time comes." "Absolutely. We would go down the mountain well before your time and stay in Shoshone City until after the baby is born. I would not risk you or a child." He squeezed her hand. "So we are really doing this, building a life together." "We have been building a life together since we married. But yes, let us build it bigger. Let us plan for a family and a future." They traveled down to Shoshone City in late April, when the trails were finally clear enough for the mule to manage with heavy packs. Victoria felt strange walking into the small settlement again, seeing the curious stares of people who remembered her as the stranded mail-order bride. Now she stood beside Jackson, clearly his wife, and she held her head high. Mrs. Chen greeted her warmly. "You survived the winter. I worried about you so far up the mountain with a man you barely knew." "I did better than survive," Victoria said with a smile. "I thrived." Jackson is a good husband. They spent 3 days in town. Jackson traded his pelts for good prices and bought supplies, including extra fabric, lumber, and tools for the cabin expansion. Victoria purchased seeds for a garden, chickens to expand their flock, and books for their growing collection. They slept at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, which felt strange and too public after their private cabin. On the second night, a man Victoria did not recognize approached Jackson in the dining room. He was well dressed with a calculating look in his eyes. "You are Jackson Lockwood, the trapper," the man said. "I have heard you have prime pelts and know these mountains better than anyone." "I do all right," Jackson said carefully. "I am looking for someone to guide a hunting party up into the high country this summer. Rich men from back east who want to shoot elk and bear. Pay would be very good." "Not interested," Jackson said flatly. "You have not heard what I am offering, $50 for 2 weeks of work." I said no thank you. "I do not need your money, and I do not want strangers trampling through my mountains shooting everything that moves." The man's face reddened. "Your mountains? You do not own the wilderness, Lockwood, and from what I hear, you could use the money. Heard you took a charity case for a wife." "A woman nobody else would have." Jackson was on his feet instantly, his hand fisting in the man's expensive jacket. "You will apologize to my wife right now, or I will teach you some manners the hard way." Victoria stood and put a hand on Jackson's arm. "He is not worth it. Let him go." "Listen to your woman," the man sneered. "She knows her place, even if you forget yours." Jackson's fist connected with the man's jaw with a crack that echoed through the suddenly silent dining room. The man went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. "Anyone else want to insult my wife?" Jackson asked the room at large. "I will be happy to oblige." The man scrambled to his feet and fled. Jackson sat back down, his breathing hard. "I am sorry. I should not have lost my temper." "Do not apologize for defending me," Victoria said firmly. "Though perhaps next time we can leave before the punching starts." The room erupted in nervous laughter and conversation resumed. Mrs. Chen brought them fresh coffee and leaned in close. "That man is Theodore Harmon. He owns the land company in Boise and thinks he runs everything in Idaho territory. He will hold a grudge against you now." "Let him," Jackson said. "I do not care what he thinks." They left Shoshone City the next morning, both eager to return to their mountain sanctuary. As they climbed the familiar trail, Victoria felt her spirits lift. This was home now. Not the town, not civilization, but the wild mountains and the cabin and the man beside her. Summer on the mountain was glorious. The meadows exploded with wildflowers and the stream ran high with snowmelt. Victoria planted her garden and tended it carefully, delighted when green shoots began to appear. Jackson extended the cabin, adding a bedroom and enlarging the main room. They worked side by side, falling into bed exhausted each night and making love with the windows open to the cool mountain air. In July, Victoria realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Jackson over breakfast one morning, "I think I am with child." He dropped his fork, his face cycling through shock, joy, and fear in rapid succession. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. My courses have stopped and I feel different, tired and queasy in the mornings." Jackson came around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "This is wonderful, terrifying but wonderful. Are you happy about it?" "I am. Are you?" "More than I can say." He kissed her palms, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "We are going to be parents, Victoria. We are going to have a family." They spent the rest of the summer preparing. Jackson hunted and trapped extra, building up their stores of meat and pelts to trade. Victoria sewed baby clothes and blankets, her hands always busy. They talked endlessly about names and plans, dreaming together about the future. In September, as the aspen trees turned gold and the air grew crisp, they made their way back down to Shoshone City. Mrs. Chen had agreed to let them stay through the winter, and there was a midwife in town who could attend Victoria when her time came. Jackson had built a small lean-to behind the boarding house where he could work on tanning hides and preparing pelts for trade. The baby was born on a snowy night in February 1875, after 20 hours of hard labor. Victoria screamed and swore and nearly broke Jackson's hand with her grip, but when the midwife finally placed a squalling infant in her arms, all the pain was forgotten. "A boy," the midwife announced. "A healthy, strong boy." Jackson looked down at his son with an expression of awe. "He is perfect. Victoria, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James after Jackson's father, and he had Victoria's dark eyes and Jackson's strong lungs. He was a hungry baby who nursed vigorously and rarely slept for more than 2 hours at a stretch. Victoria was exhausted and sore and more in love than she had ever imagined possible. Jackson was a revelation as a father. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with James for hours when the baby was fussy, and gazed at his son as if he had personally hung the moon. Victoria fell in love with her husband all over again, watching him cradle their tiny baby in his massive hands. They stayed in Shoshone City through the spring, letting Victoria recover fully and James grow strong before attempting the trek back to the mountain. During those months, they became part of the small community. Jackson helped build a new barn for one of the local families. Victoria took in sewing and helped Mrs. Chen with the boarding house. People got used to seeing them in town, stopped staring at Victoria's brown skin, and accepted them as a solid married couple with a beautiful baby boy. In May, when James was 3 months old, they finally made their way back to the cabin. The journey took twice as long with the baby, requiring frequent stops for nursing and diaper changes, but they made it safely. Jackson had hired a local boy to check on the place over the winter, and everything was in good order. That first night back, Victoria stood in the doorway of the cabin holding James while Jackson lit the lamps. The baby made small, contented sounds against her shoulder, and she looked around at the home they had built together. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, coming to stand beside her. "I am thinking about how 1.5 years ago I was so terrified and desperate. How I stepped off that stagecoach expecting to marry a man I had never met, ready to accept whatever life he offered just to have a place to belong." She turned to look at Jackson, her eyes shining. "And instead I found you. I found this life. I found everything I did not even know I wanted." Jackson wrapped his arms around her and the baby, holding them both close. "I spent 8 years hiding from the world because I thought I was too damaged, too scarred for anyone to want me. But Victoria, you saw past all that. You made me believe I could have a real life again. You gave me a family." "We gave each other a second chance," Victoria said. "Both of us. That we did." Jackson kissed the top of her head, then placed a gentle kiss on James's downy hair. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life being grateful for it." They settled back into mountain life with a baby in tow. It was harder than before, juggling the work of the homestead with caring for an infant, but they managed. James thrived in the mountain air, growing chubby and strong. He started smiling at 2 months, laughing at 4, and by 6 months he was rolling over and attempting to crawl. Victoria and Jackson expanded their homestead. They cleared more land for gardens and pasture, added a proper chicken coop, and started building a second cabin that could be used for guests or rented out to trappers passing through. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way Victoria had never experienced in her old life. 2 years later, Victoria gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Caroline after Victoria's mother. She had her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's thick, dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she had everyone wrapped around her tiny finger. James, now a sturdy 2-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping with everything. Life fell into a rhythm. Summers at the mountain cabin, winters in town so Victoria could have support with the children. Jackson's trapping business thrived. He gained a reputation for the highest quality pelts in the territory, and buyers competed for his furs. They saved money, made improvements to their property, and slowly built a life that was both comfortable and fulfilling. When James was 5 and Caroline was 3, they made a big decision. They would build a school room onto their cabin and Victoria would teach their children herself. Jackson could handle the basic education through primary years, but Victoria's background as a governess meant she could provide a real education that would prepare the children for whatever future they chose. "I want them to have options," Victoria explained to Jackson as they discussed the plans. "If James wants to be a trapper like you, wonderful. But if he wants to be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, I want him to have the learning he needs. Same for Caroline. She should not be limited just because we live in the mountains." "I agree completely," Jackson said. "Neither of us had all the opportunities we might have wanted. We can do better for our children." The school room was completed by the following summer, complete with a slate board and desks Jackson built himself. Victoria ordered books and supplies, and began teaching James his letters while Caroline looked on and absorbed everything, despite being too young for formal lessons. Other families in the area heard about the school and asked if their children could attend. Victoria agreed, and suddenly she was teaching 6 students ranging in age from 4 to 10. Jackson built more desks, and the cabin became a proper one-room schoolhouse during the day, transforming back to a family home in the evenings. Victoria loved teaching. She had missed it during her years in Boston, and doing it on her own terms without the constraints of wealthy families judging her was liberating. The children adored her, and she took pride in watching them learn and grow. One autumn evening when James was 7 and Caroline was 5, a third baby arrived. Another boy whom they named Thomas. He was a calm baby, so different from James's intensity and Caroline's vivacity. He watched the world with quiet, observant eyes, and Victoria often found him studying his older siblings as if trying to figure out how everything worked. 3 children, Jackson marveled, holding tiny Thomas while the older 2 climbed on him like he was a tree. When I was alone on this mountain, I never imagined I would have 1 child, let alone 3. Are you sorry? Victoria teased. It is rather chaotic. Not even a little bit. I love the chaos. I love the noise and the mess and the constant activity. It is the opposite of all those years of silence. He looked at her seriously. You gave me this, Victoria, this family, this life. Everything good I have is because you took a chance on a scarred mountain man. We took a chance on each other, Victoria corrected, as she always did. And it was the best decision either of us ever made. The years rolled on. James grew tall and serious, with his father's quiet strength and his mother's sharp mind. He loved the mountains and spent hours following Jackson on trap lines, learning the skills that would let him make a living in the wilderness. Caroline was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees too high or wandering farther into the forest than she should. She had her mother's quick tongue and her father's physical fearlessness. Thomas was the peacemaker, gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for seeing all sides of every conflict. When James turned 12, Victoria gave birth to twins, Daniel and Sarah. The babies were healthy, but keeping up with 5 children was exhausting. Jackson hired help, a young woman from town named Emma who came to live with them during the school year to assist with the housework and childcare. Victoria was 38 years old, tired and covered in flour from baking, when she realized she was happier than she had any right to be. She had a husband who still looked at her with love after 14 years of marriage. She had 5 healthy children who filled her days with purpose and joy. She had a home, a community, and a life she had built with her own 2 hands. She thought about the desperate woman who had stepped off that stagecoach so long ago, terrified and alone with nothing but lies and hope. That woman would not believe where she ended up. What are you smiling about? Jackson asked, coming into the kitchen with Thomas on his shoulders and the twins toddling after him. I am just thinking about how far we have come, how different everything is from what I expected. Jackson lifted Thomas down and pulled Victoria into his arms, not caring that she was getting flour all over his shirt. Better or worse than expected? So much better. Better than I ever dreamed possible. He kissed her, a deep kiss full of promise and affection that made the children shriek with laughter and disgust. When he pulled back, his eyes were soft. That works out well because you turned out to be so much better than I dreamed too. Every single day, Victoria Lockwood. Every single day. James came in from outside, nearly grown at 15, and rolled his eyes at his parents. Are you 2 kissing again? Caroline owes me money. I bet her you would be doing that. Get used to it, Jackson told his son with a grin. I plan to keep kissing your mother for the next 50 years at least. Caroline clattered down from the loft, now 13 and growing into a striking beauty who would have to fight off suitors in a few years. 50 years. Daddy, you are romantic. I like to think so, Jackson agreed, keeping his arm around Victoria's waist. The whole family gathered around the big table Jackson had built years ago, expanded several times to accommodate their growing number. They said grace, holding hands around the circle, and Victoria looked at each face illuminated in the lamplight. Her family, her home, her life. She had come to Idaho territory as a desperate woman with false papers and a heart full of fear. She had expected to settle for whatever scraps of happiness she could find. Instead, she had found a man who saw her true worth, who loved her not despite her differences, but because of them. She had built a life rich with purpose and full of love. That night, after the children were all asleep and the cabin was quiet, Victoria and Jackson sat together on the porch watching the stars. The mountain air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked quietly. "Marrying a stranger and bringing her to your mountain?" Jackson pulled her closer, his hand warm on her shoulder. "Not once. Not ever. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria. You and our children and this life we built together." "I feel the same way. I thought I was ordering a fresh start. Instead, I got everything I ever wanted and so much more." "You were not what I ordered," Jackson said, his voice full of warmth and love. "But you turned out to be so much better than anything I dreamed." Victoria leaned against her husband's solid strength and looked out at the mountains that had become her home. Somewhere out there was the woman she used to be, frightened and desperate and alone. But here on this mountain, surrounded by love and family, was the woman she had become, strong, confident, and exactly where she belonged. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had shone on her that first terrified night in Shoshone City all those years ago. But everything else had changed. She had changed, and it was all so much better than she could have ever imagined. 20 years after Victoria first stepped off that stagecoach, she stood in the yard of their expanded homestead and watched her grown children prepare for their own futures. James, now 23, had built his own cabin on the far side of their property and was courting a young woman from town. Caroline, at 21, had shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to become a doctor and was preparing to attend medical school in San Francisco. Thomas, now 18, worked alongside his father and showed every sign of becoming an even better trapper. The twins, Daniel and Sarah, now 8 years old, were inseparable and kept everyone on their toes with their elaborate schemes and boundless energy. Jackson came to stand beside Victoria, his beard now streaked with gray but his body still strong from years of mountain living. He slipped his hand into hers, their fingers interlocking with the ease of decades of practice. "Our babies are all grown up," Victoria said with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "They turned out pretty well, I think. Good people, all of them." "They had good examples," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. Jackson turned to look at her, really look at her, the way he still did after all these years, the way that made her feel seen and valued and loved. "I was just thinking about that day I walked into the trading post and saw you for the first time, how I almost did not come into town that week. How everything might have been different if I had waited even one more day. But you did not wait. You came into town exactly when you were supposed to, and you had the courage to offer a strange woman a chance when you did not have to. Best decision I ever made." "Well, that and punching Theodore Harmon in the face." Victoria laughed. "You never did tell me what happened with him. He never caused trouble for us after that night. He tried. Came back a few months later with some men, talking about how I did not have proper claim to this land, and I needed to pay him fees to stay here. I showed him my deed, properly registered and legal, and suggested he might want to leave before he embarrassed himself further. He has stayed away ever since. Good. I never liked him. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains that had been their sanctuary for 2 decades. The same mountains that had sheltered their early days of awkward getting to know you, that had witnessed the growth of their family, and that would continue to be home for as long as they drew breath. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if Edmund Pritchard had lived? Jackson asked. If you had married him instead of me, Victoria considered the question seriously. Sometimes I think about it. Edmund sounded like a kind man from his letters. We might have had a good life together. But Jackson, it would not have been this life. It would not have been you. And I cannot imagine wanting anyone else. Not even when I track mud through the kitchen or leave my wet clothes on the floor. Not even then. Though I do wish you would be more careful about the mud. Jackson laughed and pulled her into his arms, kissing her in the golden light of sunset. After 20 years, his kisses still made her heart flutter. After 20 years, she still felt lucky every single day. Caroline came out of the house with a letter in her hand, her face glowing with excitement. Mama, Papa, I got accepted. The medical school in San Francisco accepted my application. Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes as she hugged her daughter. I am so proud of you, sweetheart. You are going to be an amazing doctor. I will make you proud, Caroline promised. Both of you. You already have, Jackson said gruffly, his own eyes suspiciously bright. You already have. That night, the whole family gathered for a special dinner to celebrate Caroline's acceptance. The table was crowded and loud, everyone talking over each other, sharing stories and dreams and plans. Victoria looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After dinner, James stood and cleared his throat. I have an announcement too. I asked Margaret to marry me and she said yes. We are getting married in June. More excitement, more hugs and congratulations. Jackson broke out a bottle of good whiskey he had been saving and poured everyone a measure, even the twins who made faces at the taste. To family, Jackson toasted, raising his glass. To the past that brought us here and the future we are building together. To family, they all echoed. Later that night, Victoria and Jackson walked hand in hand to the edge of their property where a small cemetery held the graves of the animals who had been part of their lives over the years. But there was also a stone marker Victoria had placed there years ago, a memorial to the man who had inadvertently brought her to this place. Edmund Pritchard. Victoria read the inscription aloud. A good man gone too soon. Thank you for leading me to where I needed to be. Do you think he would approve, Jackson asked, of how things turned out? I think he would be happy that his death was not the tragedy it could have been, that something good came from it. Victoria leaned against Jackson's side. I like to think he is somewhere watching over us, glad that we found each other. I hope so. I hope he knows we did not waste the chance he inadvertently gave us. They walked back to the cabin as the first stars began to appear. Inside, the older children were cleaning up from dinner while the twins played a complicated game involving string and a lot of running around. It was noisy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Victoria caught Jackson's hand and pulled him close. Thank you, she said seriously. For what? For being brave enough to walk into Mrs. Chen's parlor that night and offer me a future. For seeing me when other people only saw what they expected. For building this life with me. Jackson cupped her face in his large, scarred hands. Victoria Lockwood, I would have walked through fire to get to you. Every day with you has been a gift. Every day I wake up and see you beside me, I cannot believe I am lucky enough to call you mine. I am yours, Victoria agreed, and you are mine, for as long as we both shall live. Longer than that, if I get any say in it. They kissed there in the doorway of their home, with the sounds of their family behind them and the vast wilderness before them. Two people who had started as strangers thrown together by circumstance, who had built something real and lasting through effort and faith and love. Victoria had said she was not what he ordered, and Jackson had replied she was better than he dreamed. 20 years later, that was still true. They were both better together than they ever could have been apart. They had created a family, built a home, and proved that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never planned for. The years continued to roll past with their mix of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Caroline went off to medical school in San Francisco and wrote home faithfully every week, her letters full of fascinating details about her studies and the city. James married his Margaret in a beautiful ceremony at the cabin, and exactly 9 months later, Victoria and Jackson became grandparents to a baby girl named Victoria after her grandmother. Thomas took over more and more of the trapping business, eventually expanding it to include a trading post of his own. The twins grew into fine young adults. Daniel became a skilled carpenter who traveled around the territory building homes, and Sarah discovered a talent for painting, creating beautiful landscapes that captured the majesty of their mountain home. Jackson and Victoria grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving a bit slower, but their love never diminishing. They still held hands on the porch at sunset. They still laughed at each other's jokes. They still made love with the passion of newlyweds, though they were careful about their aging bones and sometimes fell asleep halfway through. When Jackson turned 55, his joints began to ache in the cold, and the long days of trap lines became harder. He started training Thomas and James's oldest son, a strapping 15-year-old named Joshua, to take over more of the business. Victoria, now 53, had to admit that teaching a schoolroom full of children was more exhausting than it used to be. They began to talk about what their retirement might look like. "We could move to town," Jackson suggested one evening. "Get a little house in Shoshone City, be closer to the grandchildren." Victoria considered it. They now had 7 grandchildren scattered between James, Caroline, and Thomas's growing families. It would be nice to see them more often. But the mountain had been their home for more than 30 years. Could she really leave it? "What if we split our time?" she suggested. "Spring and summer here on the mountain, fall and winter in town. That way we get the best of both worlds." Jackson's face lit up. "That's a perfect solution. We could keep the cabin for when we visit and for the family to use." James is already talking about expanding his place to be the main homestead. "And we could actually travel," Victoria added, warming to the idea. "You always said you would take me to San Francisco, and I would like to see Denver, maybe even go back to Boston, show you where I grew up." "I would like that. I would like all of that." They made the changes gradually over the next few years. They bought a comfortable house in Shoshone City, close to Mrs. Chen's boarding house, which was now run by her daughter after Mrs. Chen had passed peacefully in her sleep at age 75. They spent their summers at the mountain cabin, hosting children and grandchildren for extended visits, and their winters in town where Victoria could teach at the school that had been built and Jackson could help at the trading post. In the spring of 1899, 25 years after they had married, Jackson surprised Victoria with tickets for a grand trip. They would take the train to San Francisco to visit Caroline, who was now a respected doctor with her own practice. Then they would continue to Denver, where Jackson had not been since the fire that changed his life. Finally, they would travel to Boston so Victoria could show him her childhood home. The trip was everything they had dreamed and more. San Francisco dazzled them with its size and sophistication. Caroline gave them a tour of her hospital and introduced them to her colleagues with obvious pride. They met her husband, a lawyer named Robert who clearly adored her and their 3 children who were bright and curious. Denver was harder for Jackson. He had not been back since Margaret rejected him, and walking the streets brought back painful memories. But Victoria held his hand and reminded him that the pain had led to something beautiful. They visited the spot where her father's house had stood, long since rebuilt after the fire. "I saved their lives," Jackson said quietly, looking at the elegant mansion that now occupied the space. "And Margaret could not even look at me afterward. I thought I was a monster." "You were never a monster. You were a hero who got hurt saving ungrateful people." "But Jackson, if Margaret had not rejected you, you never would have gone to the mountains. We never would have met. Our children and grandchildren would not exist." Victoria squeezed his hand. "I am sorry you were hurt, but I cannot be sorry for the path that led you to me." "Neither can I," Jackson admitted. Not anymore. Boston was bittersweet for Victoria. So much had changed in the 30 years since she had left. The building where she had lived with her mother was gone, replaced by a factory. Sarah, her cousin who had helped her become a mail-order bride, had moved to New York. But Victoria walked Jackson through the streets of her childhood, showing him where she had learned to read, where her mother had worked, where she had dreamed of something more. "You made it out," Jackson said, looking around at the crowded, dirty streets so different from their mountain home. "You got away and built something beautiful." "We built something beautiful," Victoria corrected. "Together." They returned home to Idaho that summer, exhausted but happy. The trip had given them closure on their old lives and reinforced how fortunate they were in their new one. Their house in Shoshone City welcomed them back, and within days, grandchildren were climbing on their laps and begging for stories about the big cities they had seen. Time continued its inevitable march. Jackson's hair went completely white, and he walked with a cane after a fall on the ice damaged his hip. Victoria's eyes grew weaker, and she needed spectacles to read. But they were together, still deeply in love after more than 30 years of marriage, still finding joy in each other's company. On their 35th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the mountain cabin for a celebration. All 5 of their children were there, along with their spouses, and a total of 15 grandchildren ranging in age from infant to 20. The cabin was bursting with people and noise and love. James stood to make a toast. "To my parents, who showed us what real love looks like. Who built a life out of nothing but faith and hard work. Who taught us that family is the most important thing." "To Grandma and Grandpa," the grandchildren chorused. Victoria looked at Jackson across the crowded room and saw tears streaming down his weathered face. She made her way to his side and he pulled her close. "I never imagined this," he whispered. "I never imagined I could be this happy, this loved." "Neither did I," Victoria admitted, "but here we are, still better than we dreamed." They danced that night, slowly and carefully, to music provided by Sarah on her fiddle. Jackson held Victoria close and whispered in her ear, "If I could go back to that day in the trading post and do it all again, I would not change a single thing." "Well, maybe I would have kissed you properly on our wedding day instead of that scared little peck," Victoria laughed. "You made up for it later." "That I did. That I certainly did." The years moved on. They lost friends and gained great-grandchildren. They celebrated marriages and mourned losses. They watched their children and grandchildren build their own lives while staying rooted in the values Victoria and Jackson had instilled. When Jackson was 72 and Victoria was 70, he had a stroke that left him weak on one side. He recovered most of his function, but he was never quite the same. Victoria cared for him patiently, helping him with the tasks that had become difficult, never complaining about the extra work. "I am sorry," Jackson said one day, frustrated by his inability to button his own shirt. "You should not have to do this." "Hush," Victoria scolded gently. "You think I have forgotten all the times you cared for me, when I was pregnant and sick, when I hurt my ankle that one winter, when I had pneumonia. Marriage means we take care of each other, Jackson. In sickness and in health, remember. I remember. I just hate being a burden. You could never be a burden to me. You are my heart, Jackson Lockwood. Caring for you is not a duty, it is a privilege." He took her hand and kissed it, his eyes full of love. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky. That day in Shoshone City, when two desperate people took a chance on each other. They lived several more good years together. They saw two more great-grandchildren born. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by a family that had grown so large they had to rent the town hall to fit everyone. They watched sunsets and held hands and told each other, 'I love you,' every single day." On a cool autumn evening in 1914, just as the aspens were turning gold again, Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep with Victoria beside him. He was 78 years old and had lived a full, rich life beyond anything he had imagined when he was a young man hiding in the mountains. Victoria grieved deeply, but without regret. They had loved each other fully and completely for 40 years. She had been blessed beyond measure. At Jackson's funeral, held at the mountain cabin he had built with his own hands, Victoria stood before the gathered crowd of family and friends. She was 82 years old now, stooped with age but still sharp-eyed and clear-minded. "My husband was the best man I ever knew," she said simply. "He saved me when I had nothing and nowhere to go. He loved me when the world told him he should not. He built this family with me, and he did it with honor and integrity and so much love." Her voice broke, but she continued, "I miss him already. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I am grateful for every single moment we had together." 40 years was not enough, but it was more than many people ever get. We were blessed. They buried Jackson on the mountain he loved, under the trees that had sheltered their early days together. Victoria visited his grave every day that summer, talking to him about the family, the weather, her memories. She lived 5 more years, active and engaged with her children and grandchildren. She taught great-grandchildren to read, told stories of the old days, and embodied the strength and grace she had always possessed. When she passed away in her sleep in 1919 at the age of 87, her family mourned but also celebrated a life well lived. They buried her next to Jackson on their mountain, under the aspens and the endless sky. The stone marker they placed read, "Victoria Valentine Lockwood, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She came seeking a new life and found so much more, reunited with her beloved Jackson." The cabin still stands today, maintained by their descendants who recognize it as the foundation of their family. The story of Jackson and Victoria is told and retold, a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that second chances can lead to first-rate lives, and that sometimes the best things that happen to us are the ones we never planned for. Two desperate people met by chance in a small Idaho trading post in 1874. She was not what he ordered, and he was not what she expected. But together, they built something extraordinary, a love that lasted 40 years, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that continues to this day. They proved that home is not a place you find. It is something you build with the person you love. And they showed that sometimes, when you are brave enough to take a chance on a stranger, you find everything you have been looking for. Their story became legend in Idaho territory, passed down through generations as a testament to courage, love, and the power of second chances. The mail-order bride who was not what was ordered, and the mountain man who said she was better than he dreamed, had created something that would outlast them both. A family built on love, a legacy built on faith, and a story that would inspire others to take chances on love for generations to come.